You've seen the memes. You've read the comments. A war, a recession, a scandal. Within minutes, someone drops the name, the Rothschilds. For many, that name is shorthand for shadowy, elite bankers. They secretly pull the strings of governments, central banks, and wars globally. The internet treats them like the final boss of global capitalism. A centuries-old Jewish banking family, controlling all from a European room. But here's what almost nobody does. Go back to the real history. The Rothschild family story is wild, jaw-dropping, and unprecedented. And the conspiracy theories, we're gonna break those down too, line by line, fact by fact. Understanding this family tells us more. It reveals how money, power, and propaganda actually work. Buckle up. This is the Rothschild Dynasty. Money, myth, and real global power. Let's start at the very beginning. The origin story here is genuinely one for the books. The year is 1744. Frankfurt, Germany. We're not talking about some glamorous European city center. We're talking about the Judengasse, the Jewish alley, one of Europe's oldest ghettos. A cramped, walled-off strip where thousands of Jewish families lived under strict restrictions. They couldn't own land or hold most jobs. They couldn't even walk freely through certain parts of the city. Into this world, Mayer Amschel Rothschild is born. His family isn't wealthy. His parents die of smallpox when he's just 11. He was originally supposed to become a rabbi, but with them gone, a relative gets him an apprenticeship at a banking firm in Hanover. That decision changes financial history. Young Mayer figures out fast that he has a gift. He's got an eye for rare coins, an instinct for currency exchange, and a talent for building relationships with people who matter. He works his way up, hustles back to Frankfurt. He starts dealing in antique coin. One of his best customers is Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel, one of Europe's wealthiest princes, a man known for renting out his own soldiers as mercenaries. Mayer impresses him, earns his trust. By 1769, he gets the official title of court factor. This is the foot in the door. From that moment, Mayer starts building something that had genuinely never existed before. A multinational, multi-generational, family-run banking network, and his masterstroke. His 5 sons. Amschel stays in Frankfurt. Salomon goes to Vienna. Nathan, the sharpest, gets sent to England. Carl heads to Naples. James sets up shop in Paris. 5 brothers. 5 major financial capitals of Europe. 1 coordinated family. 1 set of shared interests. And a communication system of private couriers that was faster and more reliable than most government intelligence networks of the time. This is the setup. And it's important to understand this wasn't just clever. This was revolutionary. Nothing like it had ever existed. Before the Rothschilds, moving large amounts of money or information across borders was slow, risky, and expensive. These 5 brothers changed that overnight. Now let's talk about how they actually got rich. The Napoleonic Wars, a massive conflict that reshaped Europe from 1803 to 1815. This turned out to be the Rothschilds' greatest business opportunity. And I want to be clear, this is where real history and mythology collide. The real story. Nathan Rothschild in London becomes the primary financier for the British war effort against Napoleon. The British government needs to pay and supply Wellington's armies fighting in Portugal and Spain. This requires moving enormous sums of gold across a continent that Napoleon's forces are actively trying to disrupt. Nathan engineers the whole operation. He sources the gold. He moves it through a network of intermediaries. He essentially invents a new model of international wartime finance on the fly. By the end, he has made an absolute fortune. The Rothschilds' name is now synonymous with financial power at the highest levels. Here's what else is true. The Rothschilds financed multiple sides during various conflicts, not because they were secretly orchestrating wars, but because that's literally what major banks do. Governments needed money to fight. The Rothschilds had money to lend. Business is business. That's not a conspiracy. That's how sovereign debt works. And it worked then, the same way it works today. But they were also genuinely something more than just bankers. They had the best private intelligence network in Europe. Their couriers were moving faster than official government messengers. They often knew the outcomes of battles, treaties, and political negotiations before the news was public. In a world before the telegraph, before the internet, before instant communication of any kind, that informational edge was worth more than gold. Sometimes literally. Now, the Battle of Waterloo. We gotta talk about it, because this is where the most famous Rothschild myth gets born. Once you hear the real story of where it came from, you'll understand exactly how misinformation works. Here's the myth, as it spread for generations. Nathan Rothschild had a secret agent at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. That agent watched Napoleon get crushed by Wellington's forces, raced to the coast, crossed the English Channel in a thunderstorm, and got word to Nathan 24 hours before anyone else in London knew the outcome. Nathan then went to the London Stock Exchange, pretended Napoleon had won to tank the market, bought up British government bonds at dirt-cheap prices while everyone panicked, and made an absolute killing. Hundreds of millions of francs in profit in a single day. The ultimate insider trade. Great story, right? There's just one problem. It's completely made up. Historians and researchers, including journalism professor Brian Cathcart, found that Nathan Rothschild was nowhere near Waterloo. He was in London. There was no record of the dramatic storm over the English Channel. There was no massive market crash that day. No record of the price slump that the story requires to even function logically. And the story itself wasn't even published until 1846, 30 years after Waterloo, and 10 years after Nathan himself had already died. The pamphlet was written by a French polemicist named Georges D'Erneville. Under the pen name Satan, he was openly anti-capitalist and anti-Semitic. The story was fabricated, built on forged evidence, fake diary entries, and fake newspaper quotes. And it became so widely repeated, so many times, by so many sources, that even the Encyclopedia Britannica published it as fact for decades. That's a masterclass in how a lie works. You don't need it to be true. You just need it to be repeated enough times, by enough apparently credible sources, until people stop questioning it. Now, did Nathan profit from the Napoleonic Wars broadly? Absolutely. The Rothschilds were the primary financiers of the British war effort, and made enormous amounts of money from that relationship. That's documented. That's real. But the specific Waterloo story, pure fiction, with anti-Semitic roots that were later used by Nazi propaganda to demonize Jewish people. That context matters enormously. So what did the Rothschilds actually do? Because the real list is honestly wild enough on its own. In 1875, Lionel de Rothschild, Nathan's son, now running the London branch, gets a call from the British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. Egypt is in financial trouble and is about to sell its shares in the Suez Canal, one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. Disraeli wants Britain to buy them. He needs £4 million. Fast. Parliament isn't even in session to approve the funds, so he calls Lionel. Lionel writes the check. The British government becomes the primary shareholder in the Suez Canal, and Britain's dominance over global trade routes is secured because one family bank could move £4 million on a few hours' notice without blinking. The Rothschilds financed railways across France, across Europe, across the world. The French railway network, the Chemin de Fer du Nord, was built partly on Rothschild capital. They financed the De Beers diamond mines in South Africa. They financed the Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. They funded famine relief in Ireland. They fixed the global price of gold twice a day, every trading day, for nearly a century at their offices in London. Their word literally set the value of gold for the entire world economy. In the 1870s, when France needed to pay massive war indemnities to Prussia after losing the Franco-Prussian War, the Rothschilds organized the international loan syndicate that made it happen. One family member privately noted his influence had helped keep the French government itself in power during that process. This isn't hidden. It's in history books, archives, and newspapers of the time. The Rothschilds were the most powerful private banking family in the world for a century. Their real influence on governments, infrastructure, and global finance was enormous, documented, and genuinely unprecedented. So then what happened? Why aren't they still the dominant force they were in the 1800s? Simple answer: the world changed around them. By the last quarter of the 19th century, the rise of joint stock banks meant private family banks could not compete at the same scale. The Rothschilds' model was genius for its time, but it was also its limitation. Keeping everything in the family, closely held, tightly controlled, that same strategy capped how big they could grow in mass financial markets. Their influence declined through the 20th century. The French branch was nationalized by the socialist government of Francois Mitterrand in 1981. The family rebuilt from scratch 3 employees and about $1 million in capital, and eventually restored their position as a respected advisory bank. Today, Rothschild & Co. still exists. It's a real, operating financial institution headquartered in Paris and London. It advises governments, corporations, and wealthy clients. It's genuinely good at what it does, but it manages tens of billions of dollars, not tens of trillions. For context, BlackRock alone manages over $10 trillion in assets. The Rothschilds are no longer in the top tier of global financial power by scale. The family's wealth itself has also been divided and diluted over generations of descendants across multiple branches. There are multiple separate family lines, separate businesses, separate foundations. Modern heirs manage diversified portfolios, not a secret global command center. So where does all this leave the conspiracy theories? Here's what they get right. The Rothschilds were genuinely, historically, extraordinarily powerful. They did influence governments. They did profit from wars as financiers who loaned money to governments at war, which is a normal function of banking. They did operate with a level of discretion and secrecy that was unusual even for that era. Their real history involves things that sound almost unbelievable, so it's understandable that their story got mythologized. Here's what they get completely wrong: the idea that this one family secretly controls the world economy today. The Federal Reserve, the World Bank, the IMF, every central bank on the planet, every government, every war, is simply not supported by evidence. When you trace the specific claims, as fact-checkers at PolitiFact, Britannica, and dozens of serious historians have done, they fall apart every time. They lead back to that 1846 pamphlet, to Nazi propaganda films from 1940, to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a document proven to be a forgery by Russian journalists back in 1921, and yet still circulates in dark corners of the internet. The Rothschild conspiracy theory is not really about the Rothschild family. It never was. It's a vehicle for anti-Semitism, a way to take a real, powerful Jewish family and use them as a symbol for a much older, much uglier myth about Jewish people controlling the world from the shadows. Historian Mike Rothschild, no relation to the banking family, has spent years studying this, and he's put it plainly: there is a massive industry of Rothschild conspiracy theories. Some invented on the spot, others built on ancient anti-Semitic tropes. And every time someone uncritically shares one of these stories, they're participating in that industry, whether they realize it or not. Not just as a matter of historical accuracy, but because conspiracy theories like this, and when you're looking for a secret villain, the actual institutions that shape the world you live in, that's a much bigger loss than just being wrong about one family. The real Rothschild story is one of the most remarkable tales in the history of money. A kid born in a ghetto in 18th century Germany, locked out of most of society by laws, so structurally innovative. That is a genuinely extraordinary story. It doesn't need embellishment. It doesn't need secret tunnels or puppet masters or shadowy global control. The real thing is fascinating enough. The real thing is actually instructive about how information is power, about how networks beat individual actors, about how financial innovation shapes history, about how wealth gets built and eventually diluted across generations. and about how the stories we tell about powerful people can be weaponized long after those people are gone. Know the difference between the legend and the record. It costs you nothing and it helps finance Untold. We're dropping deep dives like this every single week. Real history, real finance, no fluff, no fearbait. I want to know what you think. Is the real Rothschild story more interesting than the conspiracy version? Because personally, I think it's not even close. Tell me where you land. Of their own money supply, stay 2 steps ahead.